Thank you for starting off with that comment. Okay, so we're in the Maimer Kol Yisrael. We're towards the end of chapter 3. So in our handouts and our copies on page Reish Yates. So we talked about the idea that the meaning of Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelik Olam Haba. Every one of Israel has a part in Olam Haba. And we explained Olam Haba means the time of the resurrection. And we asked, we said that the resurrection is a greater time, a greater era, or a higher divine experience than heaven, than Olam Haba, than Gan Eden. So when a person passes away, they go up to heaven, and that's obviously a very incredible place, a wonderful place, and it's made wonderful by the fact that what the souls do in heaven is they bask in the light and the glow of godliness. And yet, Tchias HaMeisim, the time of the resurrection and the time of the redemption, that's an even greater experience. Why? Because it comes afterwards. So if the ultimate is in heaven, so then that should be the final destination. Yet it isn't. Ultimately, everybody that's in heaven will come down and be resurrected and experience whatever it is that is experienced at the resurrection. They'll experience it as a soul in a body. So if the resurrection is higher than heaven, then why is it that to get to heaven, heaven's an exclusive club? To get to heaven, you need to meet certain requirements. Not everybody gets to just go to heaven. It's not just an open. It's not an open door. So Kol Yisrael Yeshem Chek Olam Haba, as we're saying, is not heaven. That's resurrection. That's what Olam Haba is. That's what we're explaining. So to get to heaven, you have a certain criteria you have to meet. And yet resurrection is Kol Yisrael Yeshem Chek Olam Haba. To experience that greater experience, that everybody has a portion in that. Everybody will get that. It should be the opposite. The lower one should be more inclusive, and the greater one, the higher one, should be less inclusive, should be more exclusive. So that was one question we asked. Another question we asked is that we're saying that the resurrection is a greater revelation, and yet it's to souls in bodies. Generally, when we think of a body and a soul, the body limits our godly experience because it's physical. And the physical and the spiritual, the physical is limited to time and space. It's got severe limitations that the spiritual does not have. So to say that the higher experience is when the soul is in the body also requires explanation. What does it mean that greater experience would be in a body when seemingly it should be the opposite, the other way around? Okay, so those are the two questions we asked. Chapter 1, Chapter 2. Chapter 3, we start to explain the concept of body and soul. And we explained that Torah has a body and a soul. The body is the mitzvahs, the commandments, and the Torah is the soul. Now again, also we mentioned the footnotes that really within Torah there's also body and soul. Within mitzvahs there's body and soul. But generally, as we divide it, generally speaking, mitzvahs represent the body. As the Zohar says that the 48 positive commandments correspond to or represent the limbs of the king, God's limbs as they were, that's the body. And the Torah represents the soul. And here too we find in Torah and mitzvahs this idea that mitzvahs are very limited. Just as a body is limited, it's physical and therefore it's limited to its time and space. The same is true with regard to mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are very specific in how they are to be observed. The time, the place, the method, it's very specific. And Torah is not limited to time and space. Right? So mitzvahs have a certain time that they're commanded. Torah is all the time. But furthermore, even in Torah, we say that if somebody's studying the laws, let's say, of sacrifices, so it's considered as if they offered that sacrifice. So think about it. You can be sitting today, and you can be learning about the sacrifices that are brought in the temple on Sukkot. And yet, when you're learning today about sacrifices on a different holiday, which is 6 months away from now, it's as if you brought the sacrifices. To actually bring the sacrifices, it needs to be sukkahs, and you need to be in the temple times and in the temple, and you have to have a specific animal that has to meet certain criteria, and that's the way you bring the sacrifice. But studying about it is not limited to time and space. That's the spirit, that's the soul.
Is there a need to actually study the specific sacrifices on the Yom Tov?
We do that with Erev Pesach, right? Mm-hmm. We do that. On the Shalom Parim Svasein, not everybody says. And every day, every morning, Karbanos, yes. So there is such a thing, yeah. Yeah. But the point is, it's not limited. So even if we talk about, let's say this morning, before Shachris, you're going to read about the daily sacrifice, and it's as if you brought the sacrifice. That's one of the reasons why we read it. So, okay, so at least it's relevant for today, but still, you can't actually offer the sacrifice today because it's not the time or place for it. Right? But when you're doing it in Torah, that transcends time and space. That's the spiritual, that's like the soul. And yet, and the same thing is true with regard to the impact that Torah mitzvahs have on a person. There's the Torah mitzvahs themselves. Torah represents the neshama, the soul. Mitzvahs represent the body. And the same is true with regard to the impact it has on a person, that mitzvahs primarily affect the body, and Torah primarily impacts the soul. So having said this, also again, our initial questions, as well as so far as we're getting into the explanation, the idea, the premise that it's based on is that the spirit is higher than the material, right? The spiritual is higher than the physical, right? So Torah is higher than mitzvahs, because Torah is the neshama, the soul, and mitzvahs are the body. But the truth is that that's only true as they are down here, as we experience them here. But really, the mitzvahs are higher than Torah. Why are mitzvahs higher than Torah? Because Torah is divine wisdom, and mitzvahs are divine will. And as we've explained many times, will is higher, is rooted, is deeper in, just as within man, that the will is something that's more closely attached to the soul than a person's wisdom. And so since Torah comes from Chachma, which obviously is a very intimate part of a person, but it doesn't compare to Ratzon, to will, that's even deeper. So since mitzvahs are God's will, God desires these mitzvahs, so therefore mitzvahs, they come from God's will, and Torah, which is divine wisdom, comes from His wisdom. And not only is it true with regard to their source, that mitzvahs are rooted deeper in God than is Torah, but also it's apparent even as we observe them. So even though on the surface, when you look at Torah mitzvahs, or you look at body and soul, the soul seems higher than the body, but if you think about it, upon like a little deeper reflection, you realize that the opposite is true. Because the soul is animating the body. So a soul, as it's in heaven, where it's totally limitless and uninhibited, and it could do whatever it wants, it's free to do whatever souls do. Yet that soul is disturbed from that incredible experience and brought down into this world to animate a body. Similarly, with regard to Torah mitzvahs, Torah, when you take a look at Torah, what's Torah all about? Telling us how to perform mitzvahs. So if Torah is all about telling us how to perform mitzvahs, then what's the more important thing? Clearly, Torah is telling you that mitzvahs are more important. That's why Torah is all about how to perform the mitzvahs. So the same is true with regard to body and soul, that the body and soul, which are similar to Torah mitzvahs, that even though the body and the soul seems to be greater, stronger, higher than the body, in that the body is animated by the soul. The body without a soul is lifeless, and a soul is eternal, and etc. Yet, the fact that the soul comes to animate the body means that the body is greater. So in its source, the body is rooted deeper. The human body, physical body, is rooted deeper in godliness than is the soul, and that's in its source. Then the way we look at it, at least on the surface, the soul is higher than the body. But when upon deeper reflection, the fact that the soul has to come to animate the body tells us, or gives us an indication that the body is actually higher than the soul. So that's what we explain now in chapter 3. But we skip the bracketed text there. In the bracketed text, in the last paragraph of chapter 3, the Rebbe explains what this means. What does it mean when we say that the body is rooted deeper in God than the soul? So before we get into that, just by way of introduction, and so we're going to read that inside today. Before we get into that, just when we say shayrish, the source, that the source of the body is higher than the source of the soul, what does that mean, that we're saying that the source is higher? What's the shayrish? What's the significance of that? Why is the body higher than the soul? Because it has a higher shayrish. When we say the source, so when we talk about God, everything comes from God. So the higher that thing is, or put it in other terms, the earlier you can find this concept within God, the closer it is to God's essence. So that's what it means, that there's a shayrish, there's a source. What is it? Where does this thing appear initially? Where does it make an initial appearance? And wherever it makes its initial appearance, that's where it is. That's where that connection is with God, within God. So when something is further along that evolutionary process, it's more distant from God's essence. Where something that's appears earlier, that's rooted deeper. So just like we say about Bereshis, that the world was created, Beis Reishis, because of Torah and Yidden, that the two Reishis, the two beginnings of Torah and Yidden, meaning that Torah and Yidden precede creation. So the fact that they existed before creation, whatever form they existed, but the fact that they were present before creation means that they're rooted deeper in God than is creation. Creation is more external. It's as God makes himself known outside of himself. But prior to creation, that's still all within God. So that means that it's closer to God's essence. So we're saying that the source of the body is deeper in God than is the soul, which is a very radical statement, right? So we have to understand what this means. So the Rebbe will explain like this. So that's just a little overview. We'll read it inside, then we'll just try and work through this text here. When we talk about God's love of the Jewish people, so there are two ways that we find that we describe God's love of the Jewish people. One is we're God's children. You're God's children. We know that parents love their children. And the same is true with regard to God, that when we say that we are God's children, that's an indication that God loves us because we're his children. Then there's another expression of love that God shows to the Jewish people, and that is that God chooses the Jewish people. That we become the chosen nation. What does it mean that we're chosen? So when you say that he chooses us, clearly that's an expression of his love. We're important to him, and therefore he chooses us. So these two things are not one and the same. They're two different things. When we talk about choice, God chooses us. So we say that God chose the Jewish people of his free will. What does free will mean? So we like to always talk about our freedoms. Us Americans, we're very big into our freedom. And we talk about the ability to make our own choices. We have to have choices. We have to be able to make choices. But what does it mean to make a choice? So when we talk about making choices, and what does it mean to make a free choice? Right? So seemingly a free choice means really just choice, that nobody's pressuring you into choosing anything. But if you think about it, do we really actually have free will? Do we really actually? This is not a conversation. We're not going to get sidetracked and talk about free will here. That's not the topic. We're talking about a specific aspect of it. So when we talk about a free choice, what we mean is free of any external pressure or any external reason to choose or compulsion to choose something. But right. So when we say free choice, when we think we're exercising free choice, are we really exercising free choice? Most of the choices that we make, the thing that we choose actually chose us. That's really what the whole concept of marketing is all about. It's a very big industry, right? Which is to market something to a consumer to get them to choose that. So the point is, you go into a supermarket and there's who knows what kind of variety of options for you to choose from. So you think, wow, what a wonderful country. Look at all my choices. Look at all my options. But in reality, before you even walked into the store, many, many things have happened and fall into place to actually choose you rather than you choose it. Where something's positioned in the store, what shelf it's on, the lighting in the store, the packaging of whatever it is that you're going to purchase. All of these things have a determining factor in you making that choice, which is why even the food suppliers pay a price to put something on a specific shelf, because they've studied this topic. And so really, the choice is being made for you. On some level, we have the illusion of free choice, but really, those choices were made even before you walk in the store. And the same is true really in anything that we choose, that in a sense, we're chosen by the thing that we think we're choosing. So what does free choice mean? Free choice means, Bechira Chavshis means that, well, like you said, two things are equal, meaning that there's nothing compelling you to choose one over the other. So for instance, if I'm very thirsty and I want to drink and I have an option of water and I have an option of orange juice, I chose one of them, one over the other, but was it really a choice? What if the acid in the orange juice is too much for me? What if I don't like the taste of that specific water because there's too much BPA from the plastic bottle, whatever. So there are other factors that are going to impact my choice. But what happens when you have two things that are exactly the same?
Like what?
Like what? We'll get to like what in a second. It's very hard to actually find a real example within ourselves. Within our own experience, it's very hard to find an actual example of true free will. It's very hard. It works almost only within God. I mean, really, within our experience, it has to do also with mitzvahs. It relates a little bit to what we talked about in the previous Maimer, in Kishal Chabin, the last Maimer we learned about when a Yid does a mitzvah just because that's what Hashem wants. That's an ex. But it's hard to find an actual example. We're going to work through some maybe, but so the point is that free choice means when two things are equal and there's no compelling reason to choose one over the other, and yet you choose one over the other. That's a free choice. So when we talk about God choosing the Jewish people, what are we talking about? Where does he? How does he choose us? Why does he choose us? If there's something within us that's choosable, then it's not really a true choice. So, we mentioned God loving the Jewish people because they're his children. What level what do we talk about when we say that we're God's children? What are we talking about? What makes us God's children? So we know Tanya, Perik Beis, the second chapter in Tanya, he talks about the fact that just as a child comes from the mind of the parent, the same is true with regard to the Jewish soul. Perik Sheni, the second Perik in Tanya, is all about the Nefesh Hashenis B'Yisrael, talking about the Neshama. The Neshama is like God's child. So could you say that God chooses the Jewish soul? You can't say he chooses the Jewish soul. Because it's his son, it's his child. So if you had two children sitting in front of you, you come to school to pick up your kid at the end of the day, and there are two kids and they're all in the uniform, so they all look exactly the same, and you have a choice between one kid and another kid. To say, when you take your child as opposed to the kid standing next to him, is that a real choice? No, you took your child because he's your child. So that's not real true choice. So as far as our neshama is concerned, you can't say that God chose the neshama. You can't say God chooses the soul. In Perik Mem Tes and Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about choice, this idea that God chooses us, that God chooses us, and what does he choose? He chooses the body. Because the bodies are all the same. They're all the same. There's no difference between them. There's no quality of one over the other. They're all the same. And the fact that God chooses the Jewish body, that's an actual expression of choice. So, in Chumash Dvarim, there's a pasuk that talks about it says Banamat Hashem Lekechem. This is going to then it says Ki Am Kadesh Ata Uvechab Bachar Hashem. Right, that we're a holy people and God chose us. So there's two things: we're holy and God chose us. It's not that he chose us because we're holy, because if he chooses us because we're holy, then he didn't choose us because we're holy. That's not a choice. So the fact that we're holy, meaning we have a soul, a neshama, that's one thing. That's not choice. Choice comes where we're not holy, where there is no reason to take it. That's where that choice happens. So the fact that we talk about a body and a soul. So when we talk about the neshama, that comes where that's in chachma, or be in God's mind. That's as we're God's children. There, you can't say that we're chosen. But when you talk about the body is where the choice happens. So therefore, what's deeper within God? What has a higher root, a higher source in God? The choice takes place in his essence. Being children takes place already as he's a parent, as he's a father. So what's higher? What has the higher root? The body has the higher root than the soul. Because the choice, true free will, takes place in the essence of the chooser. Once we're talking about being chosen by the thing, that's already as you have your likes. I happen to like orange juice, I don't like apple juice. That's me as I like things or I dislike things. But in your essence, where there are no rules, where there are no likes and dislikes, that's the only place where true free choice can take place. So that's basically what we're saying. So that's the explanation of what it means that the source of the body is higher than the source of the soul. That it's rooted higher. That when God chooses, which is a choice in His essence, that's for the body. Whereas the neshama, that's in a sense a little bit lower. Now, what exactly this means, we're going to have to clarify. And Rebbe is going to explain it really on two levels. But that's basically a general introduction. Let's go into the text and try and work our way through it. Okay, so we're in the last paragraph of chapter 3. The paragraph is Umizem Muvan, and we're on the third line, beginning of the third line. So in the bracketed text. again, we discussed in the introduction here, we talked about how we got to this point, what we were talking about. The general point of this paragraph here is to explain that the body and the soul are the same as was we explained with Torah and mitzvahs, that even though on the surface it seems that the soul is higher than the body, but in reality the body has a higher root within God, is rooted deeper in God, and therefore, since the body is higher than the soul, that's why it's the soul that animates the body. So we see that when you look at a person, you can think about the fact that the soul comes down here to animate the body, that shows that's an indication that the body is higher than the soul.
Because
but on this, what?
The body needs physical stuff, and the soul does not need it.
He doesn't talk about that part of it. No, we're not talking about that. That eventually we'll get into that as part of the answer to our question. We're working our way towards that. But the point is, that's the point here of this paragraph. But we mentioned this idea that the body has a higher source within God than the soul. That requires obvious explanation. So let's look inside. So it's explained elsewhere, the love and attachment that God has to Israel because of their souls. You're children of God. It's like a natural love, so to speak. Similar to the love that a father has for his son. Okay, we'll have to get back to why he says avativis, emphasizes avativis, a natural love, what that means. But hainu, sheshayrish avazu hu mimadrega sheshayeches sham tfisas makim dahanehav. What does it mean when we say that the love of the love that God has for the Jewish people, as it relates to their soul, is like a love of a father to a son? Why is that a lower love than what we're going to get to in a moment? Because when a father loves his son, the son is significant to the father. The child means something to the parent, and therefore the parent loves the child. So what you love, you love your son. And you love your son naturally. But why you love your son naturally, we'll get to when we go a little deeper into what the Rebbe is saying here. But the general point is that there's a father and he has a son, and because he's my son, so therefore I love him. Meaning that there's something else other than myself here. Person that has no children doesn't love his children because he doesn't have any. You only can love your children when you have them, right? So the fact is that the other person, this child, is significant and matters to you. So there's already something else here, and therefore it's ve'ena me'atzmusei mamash. It's not since the child is relevant to you, is important to you, the child that exists outside of you. So therefore, it's not a love that's completely within the essence. Not complete, not totally. However, when we talk about the love and attachment that God has to Israel, to the Jewish people because of their bodies, so it's not because of anything unique or special about the body. Not even the virtue of being a child, which is a maila atzmis, which is not an external quality, but an inherent, essential quality. But even that is lacking within the body. But it's because God chose the soul, the body. With free will, this free will is in his essence. So what are we saying here? When we we talked a little bit about free will and why free will is completely within the person. But let's try and clarify that point a little bit more. When there's something else, we mentioned that when you choose something, the other thing is significant to you. Therefore, you choose it because it's meaningful to you. It means something to you. So there's you, and there's the thing that you choose. So when we talk about making a choice, when you choose something that's meaningful to you, what's involved here is not just you in your essence, you alone. It's you as you're relatable to something else. Or put in other terms, a parent, before they're a parent, a person who has no children, so it's not possible to say that they love their child when they don't have children. It's only when they have a child, somebody else that now takes up space and now is significant to me. But if there's a time, and elsewhere it talks about this idea about that you can't say that the love that a parent has for a child is essential in a sense, it's not your essence, since you are you before you were a parent. There's a period in your life before you had children. And you were just as much yourself as you are post. having children. So therefore, if you were yourself before you had children, so then there's a self that exists beyond even being a parent. To put it in context, when we talk about God, the way God is a father to us, the way He's the father of His children, that's how God now assumes a certain role. He assumes the role of father. So is that essential? That's something else. And therefore, it follows that when you have somebody else, a child, that's something else, that child is now significant to you, and therefore you love them. Because it's your child. But when we talk about the body, here there's nothing else that's significant. So then why does God choose the body? Why God loves us? Because we're His children. Because we're His children. So therefore He loves us. But why does God love the body? There's no reason to love the body. So why does He love it? Only because He chose to. So that's a unilateral expression of God's love. When we talk about father-son relationship, that dynamic, or a quality that makes us lovable, whatever it is that makes us lovable, that's what He chooses to love. You can love it naturally. But there already, something else is significant. Right? It's not just Him. But when we say that it's the body here, that's just Him. He chooses to love it. So that choice happens in His essence, as it has no boundaries, no rules. Okay, so that's basically what we're saying here. That's basically how. What follows. The bottom line is that the body, therefore, since it's the body that's chosen, and God's choice, it happens where in His very essence, as it's completely not defined and definable. So therefore, since that's where He chooses the body, so the body is rooted deeper within God than the soul. Make sense? But really, the Rebbe says something deeper. Because we're contrasting the body and the soul, a father and son. So the son is significant, and therefore it kind of compels the father, as it were, to love the son, right? But really, you could say, and the Rebbe says it here as well, there's a natural love that a father has for a child. And he says, it's not really from the essence of the person. But let's put it this way. Somebody that you know is not related to you, who's not with a family, a business associate, or not even, it's just a random person. You get to know them, you really like them. Why do you like them? Because there are all kinds of qualities about them. So there are qualities. And since you're an intelligent person, bless you, since you're an intelligent person, and you have certain values, when you see somebody else that embodies those values, it compels you to like them. Right? Because you have these same morals and you have the same values, and you see the person living them, so because they're important to you, and because you think they're good, so therefore you like the person. So there's something that a person does, or is, that compels you to like them. That's something outside of yourself compelling you to take that. That's not free choice, obviously, right? But that's one thing. Then you have parents and children. A parent loves a child regardless of what the child does or is. So you could like your friend because of the qualities that they have, but your children, ben kach uben kach baneihem. Right? Well, familiar with that statement. That either way, God loves us no matter what. Why does He love us? Because baneihem, they're my children. And because they're my children, I love them, whether they're very successful or whether they're shlamazels. Whether they're...
His children. He could have chosen somebody else. He could have chosen a different nation. Why did He choose us to be His...
Okay, so that's...
fine. Whatever the reason is, but that's why there is that love. You can even say it further. That's what made Him choose us.
Right, but ultimately, since we're talking about the neshama,
that's what we are talking about.
Right, but
people meaning.
But so let's work it out. Let's work it backwards. Let's work where we already have the people here, right? So they're already people, and now He has to choose one. Could you say that He's making the choice because of the neshama?
Why is He choosing us?
So why is He choosing us? Ultimately, because it's in His essence. No, that choice happens in the essence. But where is that choice manifest? In the body more than in the soul. That's the point. Because, so again, I'm working my way up to this point in a sense, in that once we're talking about God's essence, so there isn't a really hard... Let's try and finish this thought, see if this helps a little bit, okay? Let's see if this will help. The point is that when a person loves their child, That's why do you love your child unconditionally? Because your child is an extension of yourself, in a sense. Your child is rooted in you. So it's not something that you choose to love your child, right? In a sense, it's a natural thing. It's natural that you love your child. Then there's the way a person loves themselves. So here, there is nothing else. It's just you, right? But to say that you love your child the way you love yourself, and saying that it's a natural love, tells us something else, which is that here there are rules. There's the person, there's as I am, there's as I know myself, or as I know my child, and naturally that leads to a natural love for my child, or a natural love if a person even has for themselves. But when we talk about God's essence, we talk about Atzmos. Atzmos, there are no rules when we talk about Atzmos. There are no rules, there are no categories. Since there are no rules and there are no categories, you can't even say that it's natural for him to... So even though naturally love... So again, contrasting loving your child versus loving somebody else, the other person is something other than yourself, and you're compelled to love them because of whatever qualities they have. Your child, you love unconditionally, you love them essentially. Essentially. He says over here... So we're saying that you talk about the love of your child. That's the fact that they're your child is an essential quality. It's not an acquired quality. It's essential to the person. It's an essential bond. And yet, even so, he calls it avativis. It's a natural love, meaning that love has its parameters, it has its conditions. It has a definition. It can be categorized. If it could be categorized, if it has a nature, this is how it is, then already it's not ruleless. It's not beyond definition. And God's essence is beyond any kind of categorization, beyond any kind of rules. So therefore, when we say that God chooses, all bets have to be off. There can't be any reason for it. There can't be any rule to it. There can't be any nature to it. It has to be completely, in a sense, random. In a sense. Completely unpredictable. That is expressed specifically when God chooses the body. Whereas in the soul, since it's naturally, since we're God's children, so that natural love, even though it's essential on the one hand, but on the other hand, even though it's within the person themselves, but because that's the natural way person is, so that's, in other words, to be a parent, that assumes an identity. You assume the identity of parent, like I mentioned before. Before that, you didn't have that identity. You're still you, right? But so you assume the identity of parent. Still, that's not something other than yourself. Your love for your children is essential. It's inherent. It's rooted in your essence as well. It is, but it's as it takes on a certain shape and form. When you retreat all the way back to the core of the essence, where it has no form, it has no definition, it has no description. That's where the Bechira Chavshus happens. That's where free will takes place. And what happens there? B'chab Hashem, God chooses the body, which happens at Matan Torah. So there's the qualities that we have that we were given, granted that we inherit from our ancestors. We inherit from the Avos, Neshama, and that's all. It says that on Yom Tov we say in Kiddush, and we say in Davening, we say Atav Chatanu, or we say in Kiddush Shabbat Banu. We talk about God choosing us. On Shabbos we don't say that. We don't say Atav Chatanu on Shabbos. In the Kiddush we don't say that God chose us. Why? So the Mefarshim explain, because Bechira, God choosing us, happened at Matan Torah. That happened at Mount Sinai. When we say Davening in the morning before Shema, we say Vanu V'charta. You have to have in mind Matan Torah. When does God choose us at Matan Torah? At Mount Sinai. Shabbos was given to us beforehand in Mara. So before that choice takes place. Right? So why therefore it's Yom Tov, which comes post that commemorates Matan Torah, therefore we could say that God chose. Shabbos that preceded Matan Torah, in a sense preceded that choice. So the idea of choice comes after the idea of being children, that we have a neshama and that we come from a certain family that God loves. So even though that on the one hand that's also essential, so the Rebbe is basically saying two things. Number one, he's saying a deeper level is that Bechira Chavshus, true free will, takes place where there are no rules. So to say that you should naturally love something, even though in a sense that's inherent, that's all within yourself, right? So it's completely, how can you get deeper into the essence? But the fact that it has that rule, that's the nature, means that even there's already some kind of definition. It's not the ultimate essence. And a step down from that is that in a sense, at least when we're contrasting one with the other, a love of a child is as the other person is meaningful to you, means something to you. It's not just within yourself. Whereas the free will happens without anything outside of yourself compelling it. Right? Make any sense? Some sense. Anyway, so the point is that's an explanation as to why the body's shayrish, the source of the body, is higher than the source of the soul, and the main that all this is an introduction to explain to answer the questions that we asked in the beginning of the Maimer of why. But we can already see where this is going now. Why the ultimate experience is Tchias HaMesim, where the neshama is in the body, and we will have to address that, Mr. Shem, in the next class.